Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. Time for the first view from the opposition of the new season. And this week it comes from Alfie House, senior Southampton reporter for the Daily Echo. Newcastle United welcome the Saints to St James's Park for a good old 3:00 kickoff on Saturday to kick off the Premier League season. Alfie, thanks for popping on to the podcast. How are you keeping? Have you had a good summer?
Yeah, I have had a good summer. It was nice to have a few weeks off, not as many as we'd hoped for, obviously going all the way to the playoff final, Wembley. But I think pre-season's been really good. I went to Spain for a week with the team and sort of followed their pre-season tour, got a bit behind the scenes. So yeah, I'm feeling refreshed and ready, and I'm feeling quite hopeful about the season, even though we know it's going to be tough.
You see, Newcastle have gone to Australia and they've gone to Japan, and I wasn't fortunate enough to go, but I often think I would prefer a trip to Spain. You haven't got the jet lag, you're not that far away from home. It's a 2.5 hour flight, even less for you, and you're not spending 24 hours up in the air. I think that would be a bit of a nightmare for me. I'm not a great
let's
flyer.
be honest about the Australia trip. It's absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? Going to Australia 2 days after the season ends. I mean, this isn't what the podcast is about, but to anybody outside of Newcastle, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, all about growing that commercial revenue. So hopefully that's a step in the right direction for Newcastle United. But yeah, let's start with the preseason then for Southampton. Do you think it's got them ready and prepared for the new Premier League season?
Yeah, I think so. Watching their last game on Saturday at St Mary's against Getafe, you could see that they were zippy with the ball in possession. They had a lot of tempo. It ended up finishing 0-0 because the second half was drab. But they looked fit. They looked, the midfield was ready. They've got, but that being said, the preseason was kind of weird in a way because they played a non-league team, beat them 7-1. Then they beat two French teams 3-1, 3-2. But since then, they haven't really scored many goals. So I think people are concerned about the fact that the firepower is a little bit limited, and we'll get into maybe some more of that. But Brereton Diaz is probably their most dangerous player going forward. So I think they're ready from a sort of defensive point of view. I think they'll play the same way they did in the Championship. But I do think there's a little bit of a worry about where the goals are going to come from.
It's always interesting, isn't it, with pre-season, because is it about getting the minutes into the legs and getting that fitness up, or is it about giving them a real test ahead of the new season? With Newcastle, they faced two Champions League sides over the weekend, and neither really impressed. Newcastle won both games. And I suppose if you end up losing a pre-season game, it is all about the minutes under the belt, isn't it? You talked there about the firepower, and we'll dive straight in with a familiar name to the podcast, and that is Adam Armstrong. Seems to just love the Championship, but the Premier League, unfortunately for him, because we'd love to see him do well, not on Saturday, but we would like this. We'd love to see him do well in the Premier League. It just doesn't seem to be his level. Are you expecting bigger and better things from him this time around in the top flight?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because he scored, I think, 27, 28 for Blackburn in the Championship. Obviously, then he had 2 seasons in a row in the Premier League with Southampton. He didn't score more than 2 goals on both occasions. But then comes straight back down. He scores, 24 goals, whatever, the winner in the playoff final. And you just think, well, okay, he's absolutely made for that level. I mean, the only bad day he had in the Championship was he captained Southampton for the first time at the Stadium of Light the day after deadline day, and they got beat 5-0 by Sunderland, which I'm sure he didn't enjoy, obviously, as a Geordie. I'm not sure what to expect from him, if I'm being honest. I think if he can do 7 or 8 goals, I think that would be enough, because he doesn't play as a number 9. He plays off the right, usually in a free, and he offers more than just goals. But yeah, it's a big year for him, I think, because he's billed this season as, all right, now I'm settled in a team. I've got a manager that believes in me. I play in, he was playing left wing back sometimes for Southampton in the Premier League last time. That's not going to happen. He's the number 7 now. Where's number 9, obviously? So it's a big year for him to prove that he can do it.
And you've lost Che Adams. He's off to Reno on a free transfer, I think it was. Will he be a big loss in the new campaign?
He had a big season last year. He scored, I think, 15 or 16 goals. And not only that, the way that he plays the number 9, Russell Martin, he was always sort of dropping into the hole, holding players off. He's a really strong lad, quick. His finishing is just not good enough, if we're being totally honest, in terms of, I don't know if you do stats, but in terms of his shot XG and conversion rates, it's just not good enough. But he will be a miss if they don't replace him effectively. I think that Brereton Diaz is a better player than Che Adams, but he's not the same sort of number 9 out and out. And they haven't signed a striker this summer. They've been trying to sign a striker for 3 years, and obviously it's not the easiest position to buy. You've had an absolute masterstroke with Alexander Isak. Not everyone can afford £62 million or whatever it was. So I think he will be a miss in that regard, but I don't think fans are that worried about it. In the Premier League relegation season, A lot of factors were involved, obviously, and you can't blame one player, but his misses at critical times were really the reason Ralph Hasenhüttl was eventually sacked, if I'm being totally honest. So, yeah, a miss in some ways, and they liked him at Southampton.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned there Diaz, obviously was at Sheffield United last season. Villarreal, Blackburn Rovers. Again, another guy who seems to have found his level in the Championship. Questions over whether he can do it in the top flight. Of course, with being with Sheffield United last season, it's you're not in a good side, are you? So maybe it's not fair to make a proper judgment. How do you think he's going to handle the Premier League this time around?
Well, I think for a team like Southampton, he got 6 goals in 14 games for Sheffield United, and for one of the worst teams in Premier League history, probably the second worst, which I think is actually a pretty good conversion rate. And he made his first start for the Saints last week in a friendly game against Lazio, and in 4 minutes he sort of cut inside off the left and banged one into the far corner. So a trademark Ben Brereton Diaz goal. The thing that I didn't realise about Ben Brereton Diaz is he's absolutely massive. I mean, I think he says he's 6'1" online, but he's not. He's huge. He must be at least 6'3". I think he offers something completely different that Southampton don't have. I think he's a target for them now. So, yeah, I think fans are really excited about him. I think the fact he can play a few different positions, I think that he's going to be their signing this season. I think that if Southampton are going to stay up, he's going to have to score 11, 12 goals, which, based on his Sheffield United conversion rate, I think is possible.
I mean, there must just be excitement in general of being back in the Premier League. What are the expectations? Is it just fighting for survival, or are you guys aiming a little bit higher, do you think?
I think you'd be surprised, Andrew, because I don't think the fans are massively excited at the moment. I think obviously there's a level-headed section which are, and they appreciate the journey we went on last year, but a lot of people are worried about the quality of the squad. I think that's only natural coming back into the big league and having nerves. The target is quite clearly 17th, if we're being totally honest. They've got financial fair play and PSR rules to worry about. They're not able to spend freely because of the losses they've made. I think about 100 million's worth in the last 2 seasons, not including the Championship. So they're not able to go in all guns blazing. If they finish 17th, it'll be a massive success for everybody. And I think that's the target. And I think that's totally fair enough as well. Get in, dig your heels in, and then sort of maybe think about moving upwards after that.
I'm just looking at the players that you've Southampton have brought in. If my maths is correct, 15 players so far this summer. Is that right?
No, I think it's 8 signings. I think the players returning from loan and maybe some younger lads as well. But 8 first-team signings.
Good old Wikipedia. That's why I should do my research elsewhere. But I mean, still, that's a lot of players to bring in. 8. Do you think they'll be settled and ready for Saturday?
I think they've got a clear first 11, so I think I can tell you right now what the 11 will be, and I think that's a positive, but they still want more. So those 8 signings, they've come in, but they've also lost Che Adams, David Brooks, Stuart Armstrong, maybe a couple others off the top of my head as well. So they've only really come in and filled gaps. The one signing who I think looks really good is Yukinari Sugawara from AZ Alkmaar. He's a Japanese right back who takes all the set pieces, and he's one of those sort of just really talented players, I think. And it means that Carl Walker-Peters is probably going to start the season on the left to get him in the team. So I think he's a good signing. But I think they still need to do a lot more. The 11 is settled. I think that's good. I think obviously familiarity. I think it's going to be a 5 at the back. But what you'll see is Jack Stevens will play in centre back, but he'll actually be rolling into midfield and making runs in beyond. They'll have a midfield 3 of Flynn Downs, Will Smallbone, and Joe Aribo. None of them have really proven at Premier League level, but I think all of them are good players. And then up front will be Adam Armstrong and Ben Brereton Diaz.
So we'll hold you to that and see on Saturday if your prediction is right. My colleague, Aaron Stokes, our Newcastle United editor here, has been telling me that Ronnie Edwards is quite a good player, signed from Peterborough. Will Southampton fans be looking forward to seeing a bit more of him?
Yeah, I think they will. I mean, the fact they signed him for £3 million when he's been linked to loads of big clubs for the last 2 or 3 years at Peterborough, I think it's an absolute bargain. He is only 21 years old, and he's not the biggest lad. He's probably aerially is his biggest weakness. But in terms of the way he reads the game and his tackling, he's absolutely fantastic. And he's not going to be starting for Southampton this season. They've got, let's say, Taylor Hart-Bellis, Jan Bednarek and Jack Stevens as the senior 3. But he's next in line. And I've been really excited about it. They've been looking for him for at least 2 or 3 years. They finally got him over the line at, say, such a cheap price. England Youth International, yeah, a lot of people are excited about him. He follows in the mould of the sort of the long arching diagonal balls as well. I think there's a perception that Southampton sort of passed the ball around for the sake of it, and they did have more possession than any other team in England last season, even more than Man City, with 65% of the ball overall in every game. But if they can do it in one pass, they will. And players like Ronnie Edwards, they can. So I think fans are excited about that.
Well, that leads me on to my next question. I was going to get you to explain to our listeners and viewers the style of play from Southampton. What can Newcastle United expect come Saturday?
Yeah, I don't know what to expect at St James's Park because it's not been a great hunting ground for Southampton. They usually get battered, for being totally honest. I think we went there. I remember going there for the Cup semi-final, which was on deadline day in January 2023, I think it was. And I mean, that was an absolute nightmare as a reporter because you're trying to do a deadline day live blog and transfers are coming in and you've got a Cup semi-final at the same time. And luckily, Newcastle made it easy for us. They got a game done in 20 minutes. So that was handy in some ways. They will come and try and dominate the ball. As I said, they're a possession-based team. The philosophy is always find the spare man, whoever that is, wherever he is, whether it's the goalkeeper, whether it's the striker, you find the spare man. And yeah, it's all about that, keeping the ball, tempo. But like I said, it's a step up in opposition. So I guess we'll see if they can handle that. The one thing that I think will be obvious is Alex McCarthy in goal will be under pressure with the ball at his feet. And if you can press him effectively, you may find yourself sort of gifted chances.
Yeah, well, when Newcastle United qualified for the Champions League, their whole game was built on high press and energy. Last season, because of injuries and partly down to the schedule as well, that energy just wasn't there. The high press wasn't as effective. But this preseason, we've seen that against Girona on Friday in particular. The high press and energy was there. They scored 4 goals in the first half, and I think it'll return. And they will, they'll deliver it very, very well against Southampton. So it's good news from a Newcastle point of view that McCarthy maybe isn't as confident with the ball at his feet. Will the back line be able to handle that high press with Anthony Gordon and Alexander Isak chasing them down?
Yeah, I mean, when you sort of talk about the front three, Anthony Gordon, Alexander Isak, and my fantasy team player Jacob Murphy as well. It's dangerous. It scares me a little bit. Taylor Howard-Bellis and Jan Bednarek are good with the ball at their feet, and Yukinari Sugawara and Kyle Peters are masters of their craft. So I don't think they're players that need to be worried about. But ultimately, basically all the chances that Southampton have conceded in pre-season have been from mistakes in possession. They're actually pretty solid otherwise. Obviously, again, step up in opposition. But yeah, I don't think I'm too worried about those guys. But ultimately, it's an occupational hazard. If you're going to pass the ball around your own box 100 times in a game, one of those could go wrong, and then you're going to be punished by players like Alexander Isak.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about a couple of Newcastle United's players. Let's be honest, the 3 that you've just mentioned there in a moment. The last time Newcastle lost to Southampton at home was back in April 2015. So they do tend to go well against Southampton. In terms of Newcastle United's stars, you've mentioned Alexander Isak, Anthony Gordon. I mean, Jacob Murphy's had a storm in pre-season. Even Newcastle United, we believe, are in the market for someone to come in on that right flank. But Jacob Murphy is definitely making a case to be the man to start there. Are those the 3 players that Southampton will fear the most, or is there anyone else that you think springs to mind?
Yeah, I think they're probably the attacking players, so naturally you fear them. I'm intrigued to see if Tino Livramento starts. Whether Kieran Trippier comes back in or not, I don't know. But obviously we really like Tino down at Southampton. He was a good young player for a year. I mean, he joined us at 18 years old, and he took Kyle Peters out of the team on the first game of the season. And everyone was like, well, this is strange. But you could just see the talent was there. We paid £5 million for him. It was an absolute bargain. And he had a really tough year. And he's a really nice lad. I've spoken to him a couple of times, and he really is a lovely young fella. He was a bit younger back then as well, so maybe he was a bit more nervous. But he had a tough year with injuries. So whether he can sort of keep his place ahead of Kieran Trippier, I'll be interested to see that. And you've obviously got players like, I don't know if Joelinton's back, but Bruno Guimaraes, you've got stars all over. And Nick Pope's one of my favourite goalkeepers. So, yeah, I think it's a ridiculously good team. Whether Lewis Hall starts left back or not, I don't know. I know he likes big Dan Burn, but if you haven't got Sven Botman, maybe he'll play through the middle and Lewis Hall.
Yeah, I mean, you've kind of highlighted the questions that we're all asking and all talking about when it comes to Newcastle's starting 11. If it was me, Tino Livramento would start every day of the week. I think he's absolutely brilliant. I think his time is now. Eddie Howe, though, I think may start Kieran Trippier, and I don't think too many fans would be happy with that because Tino Livramento has definitely proven that he can be first choice. And, like I say, his time is now. Across the back 4, Fabian Schär picked up a knock against Girona and just against Brest, sorry. And just to clarify to our listeners and viewers, recording this on Tuesday morning, it won't come out till Friday. So obviously within that time, we might have news on injuries or what have you, so just bear that in mind. But we think the team is likely to be Fabian Schär, Lewis Hall at left back, and then probably Dan Burn at centre back. Even if Mark Gee signs from Crystal Palace, before Saturday. I think it'll probably come too early for him. Joelinton is back, which is bad news for Southampton because he's had another one who's had a brilliant pre-season. He looks like a man who's making up for lost time after missing the majority of the second half of last season. Bruno in the middle, probably Sean Longstaff, Gordon on the left, Murphy on the right with Isaac up front. So I think everyone's just looking forward to seeing the majority of the team back together and fit and raring to go because I had such bad luck with injuries last season. So we are looking forward to the kickoff. And I want to ask you about James Ward-Prowse. Now, obviously, the first season without him, he starred for West Ham. I always feared him when for Southampton. Anytime there was a free kick, corner, dead ball, he was one of those players I just loved watching. Have Southampton replaced him? Because obviously he was kind of the talisman, in the Premier League for Southampton. Have they got someone, in his place that can do what he did it for them?
Probably not. No, I think it would have been really difficult to replace James Ward-Prowse. I mean, you mentioned obviously the dead ball proficiency. He got into sort of 7, 8, 9, 10 goals every single Premier League season for Southampton, playing in midfield. A lot of the times as a 6, and sometimes as an 8. He was an absolute joke, if I'm being honest. And I know that the conversation right now between some Saints fans is he's not going to play for West Ham. Would you take him back? And I think anybody who says no is absolutely mental because he was their best player for 4 years in a row. I wouldn't say they've replaced him like for like. They've got Flynn Downs, who now sits at the anchor of midfield, different type of player, and he's as critical to the team as James Ward-Prowse was. If they play without Flynn Downs, they basically never win, even in the Championship last season. And he missed a few games through injury and illness. But they haven't replaced those goals from midfield. They've got Will Smallbone, who got maybe 6, I think, in the Championship last season, but he's not tested at the top level. So he'll be looking to break in behind the final line. He'll get chances, but whether he takes them or not, I don't know. But yeah, I've got a lot of respect for James Ward-Prowse. I just wonder, now Saints have come straight back up and he hasn't got back into the England team. He's not really playing for West Ham. Should he have stayed at Southampton, been the captain that led them back to the Premier League, where do you want your statue sort of thing, rather than this sort of downturn in his career. But yeah, that ship has probably sailed now. But interesting that he's 1 goal off of David Beckham's Premier League record and he still hasn't got it in a year with West Ham. So I'm looking forward to him doing that because his idol growing up was David Beckham and now he's he's on the verge of doing something special.
It'd be very nice for him to reach that achievement. What is the viewpoint from the Saints on Newcastle United? I mean, is it a team that they fear? Is it a team they look at and think we're underdogs coming into this game? What do you think the viewpoint is?
They definitely feel they're underdogs coming into the game, 100%. I think a lot of teams are to be feared, but Newcastle, particularly at St James's Park, is, in my opinion, one of the toughest games of the season. So much quality in the team, great atmosphere. On the first day as well, it's going to be electric. I remember back a couple of years ago when you were in the bottom 3, when Eddie Howe first came in, and it was during the COVID season, and you ended up getting a game postponed because you had a number of injuries and sort of used a loophole to use the COVID rules to postpone a game. And then you played the game at the end of January. And I think you signed Chris Wood, you signed maybe Bruno Guimaraes and maybe someone else. And I think all of them scored.
Trippier would have been Kieran Trippier as well.
Yeah, all of them scored basically, and basically won you the game. So it's not a rivalry by any means, but I think there was a bit of bad blood at the time. But obviously Newcastle's a club that a lot of people respect in the football world, so it's a good place to go. I think people will enjoy it as an away day, but I don't think they expect to get a result.
If you were sitting around the table then with Eddie Howe and he asked you first off for Southampton's biggest strength, what would you be telling him?
Well, that's a really good question. Biggest strength? Bit worried I can't answer immediately. Yeah, I mean, I think
the one thing he has to work out and stop, and the one thing that maybe his scouts and his rest of his staff have picked up on.
I think he's got to stop them keeping the ball. Ultimately, if he wants to win the game comfortably, then you've got to take the ball off of Southampton because that's what their entire game is based on. And I think once you take that away from them, they struggle a bit more. And also just keep it tight at the back because they're not going to be the most expansive going forward. They haven't got the attacking options. So if you can limit them to the chances, they won't score. So I think they're the two things: keep all off them and keep it simple at the back. It's going to be a tough game for Saints.
And their biggest weakness?
Biggest weakness is that we've highlighted already in terms of just taking the ball off of them and pressing them and making the most of what they do present to you at the back, because there will be moments where they take the ball under a lot of pressure. And another big strength for Southampton is they're extremely brave. They are really courageous in possession. They will take risks. A lot of the time it comes off, it looks brilliant. But if you're ready to pounce on it when it doesn't, that's the chance.
And who's the star man? If Eddie Howe was saying the one person I've really got to try and keep quiet, who would you be recommending?
I think in terms of keeping quiet, it's going to be Brereton Diaz. And just in terms of his strength, his physicality, the fact he can finish, it'd probably be him. I've highlighted Will Smallbone in midfield, and I think he will be making a lot of dangerous runs, and they'll want to keep him quiet as well, but maybe not as polished as someone like Brereton Diaz.
Well, it's going to be an interesting battle, you would imagine. Will he play? Are we thinking it's going to be two up top, as in a traditional two, Armstrong and Diaz?
Yeah, it'd be a 5-3-2 in theory, but the two up front are quite wide. There's usually a gap for the midfield to come in between them. And the five at the back is asterisk, because Jack Stevens on the left of the back three always rolls into midfield. So then it's the four, and they build up with a 4-4-2 effectively. So, yeah, it's very fluid. And Russell Martin, the manager, he's not bothered about formations and starting positions or anything like that. It's all about if somebody vacates a space on the pitch, somebody else fills it. As simple as that.
So they must be very organised for that to come off then.
Yeah, I think tactically there's a lot of demands on the players, and that's why it took last season a lot to get up to speed. But once they got going, they went on a 24-game unbeaten run, and it looked, absolutely magnificent. So yeah, I think it just takes some time to get up. But a lot of the players they've signed this season, they came in early in pre-season, so I think everybody's really acclimatised. And they kept Taylor Hart-Bellis and Flynn Downs, who were on loan last year, spent 40 million quid on the pair of them, and they were absolutely crucial.
And I guess when you've got the aim of 17th, as you said earlier in the show, that maybe in many ways relieves a bit of the pressure that you're not aiming for anything more than that, and you're very focused. Because some teams come up and they think, mid-table is where we're aiming, maybe even a little bit higher, but then they fall a little bit short. So I suppose the pressure's off Russell Martin in many ways.
I think the pressure from the fans won't be off, because I think there's an expectation. Southampton are a huge club and they've had such good success in the past, even sort of 10 years ago, but also 30 years ago. So I think the pressure will be on from the fans, but I think it makes things very clear when your target's 17th. You've only got to be better than 3 teams. If you get hiding from someone like Newcastle, it doesn't matter. You just move on to next weekend, Nottingham Forest at home. Those are the games that really matter. So I think it takes the pressure off these sorts of matches like St James's Park, because ultimately losing to Newcastle is not going to define where Southampton finish this season.
All that remains to be done, Alfie, is to get your score prediction. How is this one going to go?
Yeah, well, look, I do a Total Saints podcast with some Saints fans, and I made a prediction which I now regret, because I'm probably going to be, if the club see it, they'll think I'm a bit of a, but I said 3-0 to Newcastle, but I caveated it by saying I really don't think it matters. I think it's more about the quality of Newcastle. I think they're such a good team. They're going to be really up for it on the first day of the season. I don't think it matters at all. When it comes to my Nottingham Forest prediction next weekend, I'll feel a bit more favourable. So, yeah, 3-0 to Newcastle, but I'm not going to begrudge anybody for that result.
I think the scoreline will be something similar. I think Newcastle will score a few goals. I think it's a test of their character, because they come in as favourites. They're at home, starting the Premier League season in front of a crowd that is expecting big things this season. They haven't maybe done as much in the transfer market as we'd have liked. Obviously, Mark Gay could sign by the time this comes out, and hopefully he's done and dusted. But even then, people are still looking around for a right winger, and other additions. So it's going to be a test of their character, whether they can put on the performance which silences those who are maybe a little bit unhappy at the transfer window thus far. But I'm going to back them to win as well. I've got 4-1 written down here, but to be honest, I'll just take 3 points. It's always nice to start the season with a victory. I'm not really too fussed about how it comes, in all honesty. But Alfie, thank you very much for popping onto the podcast. It is much appreciated. To you guys watching and listening, please give the video a thumbs up, leave us a rating and review on the audio channel, and head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news, including Eddie Howe's press conference, which will be today, Friday, and all the build up to the Southampton game through our dedicated live blog.